The Galactic Council chamber was a breathtaking masterpiece of cosmic engineering, a vast, floating construct suspended in the void between galaxies. The structure itself was an architectural marvel, shaped like an enormous ring with a transparent dome that allowed an uninterrupted view of the swirling nebulae and distant star clusters beyond. It was a place of diplomacy, where civilizations from across the known universe gathered to discuss alliances, trade agreements, and, most importantly, to prevent war. This was no ordinary meeting. This was a historic summit, an event that only occurred once every few centuries, where the leaders of every major species convened in person. The stakes had never been higher. Political tensions were at an all-time high, and conflicts between the expansionist Varrock Dominion and the defensive Core Alliance were on the verge of breaking into all-out war. The very future of galactic peace depended on the negotiations that were about to take place. Inside the chamber, representatives from over 100 species sat in their respective places, their appearances as varied as the landscapes of their homeworlds. There were the Cepheroids, floating gelatinous beings with bioluminescent veins pulsing beneath their translucent exteriors. The Zorthians, crystalline entities whose bodies refracted light into mesmerizing spectrums. The Vaknari, towering fur-covered bipeds with 4 arms and piercing intelligent eyes. And seated at one of the smaller tables near the back, a human, Captain Elias Carter, Earth's official representative to the Galactic Council, sat comfortably, in his chair, arms crossed as he watched the proceedings with mild amusement. He was dressed in the standard ambassadorial uniform of the United Earth Federation, sleek, dark navy with silver trim and an insignia over his left breast. While the rest of the council members carried themselves with rigid formality, Elias radiated an air of relaxed confidence that seemed almost out of place among such powerful beings. Despite humanity's recent entry into the interstellar community, they had already developed a reputation, one that left many species both intrigued and wary. The council was still trying to fully understand what to make of humans. Unlike most species who followed predictable patterns of behavior, humans were unpredictable. They defied logic, acted against apparent self-interest, and engaged in reckless behaviors that no sane civilization would dare attempt. Some admired them, others feared them. Elias, of course, found the whole thing hilarious. The meeting had been going on for hours. The council speaker, a luminescent orb of energy known as Illimari Prime, floated at the center of the room, its flickering form pulsating as it addressed the assembly. "Let us not forget," the speaker intoned in its melodic, multi-layered voice, "that the purpose of this gathering is to ensure that war does not spread beyond the contested systems. We are here to negotiate, not to escalate." A low murmur rippled through the chamber as various representatives exchanged glances. Many supported the speaker's words, but others were not so easily convinced. The Varrock had been expanding aggressively, and the Core Alliance was running out of patience. Then the atmosphere changed. A deep rumbling vibration resonated through the chamber as the massive entrance doors slid open. A wave of unease swept through the assembled representatives as they arrived. The Varrock. A deathly hush fell over the room as the apex predators of the known galaxy made their entrance. The Varrock were terrifying, towering reptilian creatures, covered in thick obsidian-black scales. Their muscular forms radiated a primal strength unmatched by any other species. Their elongated crocodilian snouts housed rows of razor-sharp teeth, and their golden slitted eyes burned with an intelligence that made them even more dangerous. They were not a species of diplomacy. They were a species of conquest. At the head of the Varrock delegation was General Sokthar the Unyielding, a warlord whose very name sent shivers through the council. Standing at a staggering 12 feet tall, he moved with the grace of a predator, his powerful frame adorned in ceremonial armor etched with the battle-scarred history of his people. His claws, each as long as a dagger, tapped rhythmically against his sides as he surveyed the chamber with cold indifference. The Varrock did not believe in negotiation. They believed in dominance. The only reason they were even present was because the Core Alliance had forced them into peace talks through sheer military resistance. The tension in the chamber tripled. Council members instinctively leaned away as the Varrock delegation took their seats. Even the most hardened warriors among them couldn't suppress the instinctual fear that came with being in the presence of such lethal beings. Elias, however, was completely unfazed. He had read the reports. He had seen the holographic projections of Varrock warships decimating enemy fleets. He knew exactly how dangerous they were, but he also knew something else, something that none of the other species seemed to understand. Varrock were predators. Yes, but predators were still animals. And humans? Humans had a way with animals. A smirk played at the corner of Elias's lips as he observed Zokthar. The general sat at the Varrock table, his claws flexing against the metal surface. His nostrils flaring as he subtly tested the air. Despite his outward composure, Elias could tell. He was irritated. No doubt the Varrock resented being here, forced into talks they didn't believe in. For them, strength dictated authority, and peace was often seen as a sign of weakness. Elias leaned back in his chair and muttered under his breath, just loud enough for the nearby delegates to hear. Well, someone's in a bad mood. The Sephiroid representative next to him let out a horrified gurgle, nearly dissolving into a puddle at the sheer audacity of the comment. A Vaknari ambassador, who had been silently observing, shot Elias a look of utter disbelief. Did the human just casually insult a Varrock warlord? Elias chuckled to himself. This was going to be fun. The council speaker resumed the meeting, but the atmosphere remained charged. Every species present was carefully monitoring the Varrock delegation, wary of even the slightest misstep that might provoke them. But no one, not a single soul, could have predicted what was about to happen next. Because in just a few moments, Elias Carter was going to do the unthinkable, and the entire galaxy was about to lose its mind. The Galactic Council chamber was tense, like a wire stretched to its breaking point. Discussions resumed, but no one was truly focused. The presence of the Varrock loomed over the assembly, an unspoken threat in every flick of their tails, every slow flex of their clawed hands. The other representatives spoke carefully, measuring their words, avoiding anything that might be perceived as a slight. Everyone knew that one wrong move could spark a war. Elias Carter, however, didn't seem concerned. The human representative sat with a relaxed posture, arms folded across his chest, a thoughtful look on his face as he regarded General Zokthar the Unyielding. The Varrock warlord had been quiet, listening but not speaking, his golden reptilian eyes scanning the room like a predator sizing up prey. Then something unusual happened. Elias stood. Every conversation in the chamber ceased. The Zorthian delegates, crystalline body dimmed in shock. The Vaknari ambassador let out a low, guttural growl of warning. Even the floating Sephiroids, usually indifferent to physical confrontations, trembled slightly. A human rising in the presence of a Varrock was a challenge. The air thickened with anticipation. Zokthar's slitted pupils locked onto Elias, his massive frame tensing as he prepared for something. The Varrock didn't know what exactly, but they weren't used to creatures moving toward them unless it was to fight, or to die. Elias took a casual step forward. The room collectively stopped breathing. The security forces around the perimeter tensed, their hands hovering over their weapons. Diplomats whispered anxiously among themselves. The Sephiroid next to Elias let out a faint, warbling wail. Zokthar's claws scraped against the table, producing a high-pitched metallic screech. His nostrils flared. His warriors behind him shifted, their tails flicking in subtle aggression. This human was approaching him. Him. The general of the Varrock Dominion. A creature feared across the stars, a being whose mere presence made the most hardened warriors hesitate. And yet this strange, soft, fragile thing was moving closer with an expression that wasn't fear, wasn't aggression. It was amusement. Elias stopped right next to him. The entire chamber braced for bloodshed. Then, to the absolute horror of every species present, Elias lifted a hand, and before anyone could react, before the security forces could intervene, before the Varrock warriors could lunge, he patted Zokthar on the head. Silence. Not just any silence. A silence so complete it felt like the universe itself had momentarily stopped. Time seemed to freeze as every eye in the chamber focused on one impossible sight. A human, standing next to the most feared warlord in the known galaxy, petting him. Not attacking, not cowering, just patting him. Zok'Thar's mind reeled. No one had ever done this, not his warriors, not his rivals, not even his own species. The Varak did not engage in touch outside of combat or mating. Physical contact was either dominance or destruction, and yet, this human had touched him like he was some kind of tame beast. Elias, utterly oblivious to the existential crisis he had just triggered in an apex predator, chuckled. His fingers scratched lightly against the ridges of Zok'Thar's skull, right between the sharp armored plates. Damn, he mused. You remind me of my dog back home. Someone in the crowd screamed. The council speaker's entire form flickered wildly as it attempted to comprehend what it was witnessing. The security forces, previously poised to intervene, now stood paralyzed, uncertain whether they had just witnessed an act of diplomacy or the beginnings of an intergalactic incident. The Varak warriors behind Zok'Thar hissed in unison, their bodies coiling, their hands twitching toward their weapons. Zok'Thar still didn't move. His body was frozen, his mind locked in a loop of incomprehension. Elias, seemingly unaware of the galactic catastrophe he had just caused, gave one final pat and pulled his hand back. There we go, he said, smiling. Not so bad, huh? Zok'Thar's mouth opened slightly, his sharp teeth visible. A growl rumbled in his chest, a deep, thunderous sound that sent vibrations through the table. The security teams immediately aimed their weapons. But something was off. The growl, previously believed to be a sign of aggression, sounded different. The more perceptive species in the room suddenly realized it wasn't a growl of anger. It was something else. Something disturbingly close to a purr. The realization hit the room like a meteor impact. Zok'Thar, the scourge of the outer worlds, the apex of the Varak, was purring. One of his warriors, standing just behind him, visibly twitched, as if their very soul had just left their body. Elias, still grinning, gave a satisfied nod. Yeah, you like that, don't you? Tough guy like you, I bet no one ever gives you head scratches. Shame, really. You got good head scratching ridges. The council collapsed into chaos. Representatives shouted over one another, several different species started hyperventilating, and the council speaker actually glitched out, disappearing, entirely for a moment before reappearing, clearly struggling to process what had just occurred. The Zorthian delegate slammed a crystalline fist onto the table. This is madness. Humans are insane. That was a death wish. A Vaknari roared in agreement. He should be dead. That should have been instant death. What is happening? But the most shocking reaction of all came from Zok'Thar himself, the UFO. Massive Varak slowly turned his head to look at Elias, his golden eyes unreadable. His claws flexed against the table, his muscles tensed, and then, in a voice so deep it rumbled through the very structure of the chamber, he spoke. Your species is insane. Elias just grinned. Nah, he said. We just like to pet cool creatures. The chamber descended into pandemonium. The Galactic Council chamber was in absolute chaos. Multiple delegates were speaking, or more accurately, screaming over one another. Some were demanding Elias be removed immediately before he got the entire assembly slaughtered. Others were frantically trying to process the sheer impossibility of what had just occurred. The Sephiroid representative, who had collapsed into a gelatinous puddle upon witnessing the event, was now weakly reforming, their bioluminescence flickering in distress. And the Varak? They were motionless. Zok'Thar's warriors, some of the most feared beings in the known universe, looked like they had just seen the end of reality itself. Their tails twitched erratically, their claws flexing and unflexing in sheer confusion. They were waiting for their general's reaction, a response that had not come, because Zok'Thar himself was still staring at Elias The massive warlord had yet to move since the human had petted him like some kind of domesticated creature. His golden eyes were narrowed, his claws tapping absently against the table, his ridged brow furrowed. His mind was caught in a loop of disbelief. This tiny, fragile mammal had just walked up to him, the most dominant apex predator of the Varak Dominion, and touched him. And worse, his body had responded to it. The sensation still lingered. The odd but not entirely unpleasant feeling of fingers scratching over the hardened ridges of his skull, the pressure of a hand, small but firm, patting him as if he were some kind of tame beast. And for reasons beyond his own comprehension, he had not killed the human for it. "General," one of his warriors hissed in Varakian, stepping closer. "Do you require retribution? Shall we execute this creature for his—" "No." The word came out sharper than intended. Zokthar's warriors flinched at the sheer finality of it. Elias, still standing beside him with that damnable smirk, raised an eyebrow. "Huh. That's the first time you've spoken to me directly." Zokthar turned his head slowly, his golden eyes burning into Elias with an intensity that could have melted metal. "You touched me." Elias shrugged. "Yeah, I did." "You touched me," Zokthar repeated, as if trying to confirm it had actually happened. Elias nodded. "Uh-huh. You had some good head ridges. Seemed like a waste to just leave them unscratched." The chamber erupted again in a mixture of horrified gasps, strangled choking sounds, and outright disbelief. Zokthar's claws dug into the table. His muscles coiled. The air thickened with tension once more. And then, in a movement so fast it blurred, he stood. 12 feet of lethal muscle and apex predatory instinct loomed over Elias in an instant. The council gasped as one. Security forces snapped to attention, weapons raised. The Vaknari were already baring their teeth, ready to either flee or fight. The Zorthians had dimmed into near invisibility. Elias? Elias just looked up. Zokthar's shadow completely engulfed him. The warlord's massive head lowered, his burning eyes narrowing. His tail slowly coiled, an unmistakable sign of predatory focus. And yet, Elias did not back away. He did not flinch. He grinned. Zokthar exhaled, a deep rumbling growl vibrating through the room like distant thunder. "You are either the bravest creature I have encountered, or the most foolish." Elias rocked on his heels. Why not both? A slow, dangerous silence stretched between them. Every other species in the room was ready to flee, and then, to everyone's disbelief, Zokthar sat back down. A murmur of absolute shock rippled through the chamber. The Varak warlord had just backed down. Not from a fight, not from a threat, but from a human. Zokthar exhaled again, his claws flexing against the table. "You are a strange species, human." Elias chuckled. "Oh, buddy, you have no idea." Zokthar studied him in silence for a long moment. Then, in a gesture that sent waves of sheer panic through the council, he slowly reached out. His massive, clawed hand extended toward Elias's head. Every security officer in the room panicked. Elias didn't move. And then, Zokthar patted him, the same way Elias had patted him. The chamber descended into utter pandemonium. Someone fainted. Someone else screamed. The council speaker's form glitched out entirely. The Vaknari ambassador let out a strangled sound. "What is happening?" Elias, absolutely unbothered, just grinned up at Zokthar. "See? Not bad, huh?" The Varak warlord exhaled heavily. "Unacceptable," Elias smirked. "And yet, you didn't stop yourself, did you?" Zokthar rumbled. "I do not know what sorcery your species wields, human, but you will not sway me with it." Elias shrugged. "It's not sorcery, buddy, it's just being nice." Zokthar narrowed his eyes. "Explain." Elias tilted his head. "You guys are scary as hell. You know it, I know it, everyone in this room knows it. No one ever sees you as anything but scary. No one ever treats you like, I don't know, just a person. A dude who maybe likes a good head scratch every now and then." Zokthar blinked slowly. The council lost their minds. The Zorthian delegate slammed a fist onto the table. Are you trying to tell us that the reason the Varrock are so aggressive is because no one has ever petted them? Elias raised an eyebrow. I mean, have you ever tried? A horrified silence. No one had. No one would. No one except a human. Sokthar growled softly. Not in anger, not in warning, but in thought. For the first time he looked uncertain. Elias, sensing opportunity, smirked. Come on, big guy. You can't tell me that wasn't at least a little nice. Sokthar did not answer immediately. His claws flexed, his tail twitched, and then, after a long, painful silence, he muttered, It was acceptable. The room collapsed into anarchy. Elias just grinned. Sokthar, the apex predator of the Varrock Dominion, the warlord feared across entire galaxies, had just admitted that he enjoyed a head scratch, and with that, the entire balance of power in the galaxy shifted. The Galactic Council chamber was in shambles. Representatives were panicking, security forces didn't know whether to shoot or stand down, and the Sephiroid ambassador had completely fainted again. And at the center of it all, Elias Carter sat, casually, looking like he had just won the lottery while the most feared warlord in the galaxy, General Sokthar the Unyielding, sat across from him in deep existential crisis. The Varrock were a species that thrived on dominance. They respected only strength, feared nothing, and had spent centuries carving their place as the undisputed apex predators of the galaxy. Other species cowered before them, negotiated through gritted teeth, and did whatever it took to avoid conflict. But now their greatest warlord had just been petted, and he had not killed the offender. Worse still, he had reciprocated. The implications of that act were seismic. For the first time in recorded history, the Varrock had not responded to an act of perceived dominance with violence. Instead, their most fearsome leader had admitted out loud that he had enjoyed it. No one knew what this meant, except, perhaps, Elias. The human sat back in his chair, arms crossed, a satisfied grin tugging at the corner of his lips. So, now that we've broken the ice, the council speaker finally regained enough composure to speak. Their translucent form flickered erratically as they projected their voice across the chamber. Human Representative Carter, do you have any idea what you've just done? Elias scratched his chin thoughtfully. Well, let's see. I pet the big scary warlord, he pet me back, and nobody died. So, all in all, I'd say this was a win. A win. The Zorthian delegate looked like they were about to explode. A win? You just fundamentally altered intergalactic power dynamics. The Varrock, they pointed frantically at Sokthar, are no longer an untouchable force. You have disrupted centuries of galactic diplomacy with head scratches, the Vagnari ambassador whispered in utter disbelief. Elias just shrugged. Hey, I saw an opportunity. An opportunity for what? The council speaker demanded. Elias smiled. Peace. The chamber fell silent. Sokthar's golden eyes narrowed. His claws flexed against the table, but his body language wasn't hostile. It was thoughtful. Explain, the warlord rumbled. Elias leaned forward. Look, let's be real. You guys, you're terrifying. No one wants to fight the Varrock. You've been ruling by fear for centuries, and yeah, it works. But fear-based power? It's fragile. Sokthar's tail twitched slightly. Elias continued. When people fear you, they don't trust you. And when they don't trust you, they look for ways to get rid of you the moment they see an opening. So yeah, you've got control, but it's unstable. Everyone's just waiting for the right moment to turn against you. Sokthar didn't deny it, because it was true. Elias smirked. But what if, instead of ruling through fear, you ruled through respect? What if people saw you as more than just a walking extinction event? What if they actually liked you? The council erupted. Impossible. Ridiculous. The Varrock do not require friendship. But Sokthar? He was silent. His claws tapped against the table rhythmically as he considered the humans. Words. Elias pressed on. I'm not saying you need to throw a galactic tea party and start singing friendship songs, but Think about it. Your power has always come from being untouchable. Now? He gestured around the chamber. Now you're more than that. Zokthar exhaled slowly. You imply that allowing myself to be touched has increased my power. Elias grinned. No, I'm saying it's changed your power. Before today, everyone here saw you as a monster, a force of nature to be avoided. But now, you're not just feared anymore. He leaned in slightly. Now you're a mystery. And that's even more powerful. A ripple of understanding passed through the chamber. The Varrock warriors behind Zokthar shifted uncomfortably. They were used to straightforward power, strength, violence. Not this. But their general? He was intrigued. The warlord turned his gaze to Elias, eyes piercing. You have done something no other species has dared. You have altered my image, human. Tell me, what is your end goal? Elias leaned back, completely at ease. Simple. I want to stop the whole inevitable galactic war thing. And I think you do too. A murmur of shock ran through the council. Zokthar narrowed his eyes. You assume much. Elias shrugged. Maybe, but if you wanted war, you would have crushed me the second I touched you. Silence. Dead. Silence. Because the human was right. Zokthar's claws flexed again. The logic was uncomfortable, but true. If the human's actions had truly insulted him, the Varrock warlord wouldn't be sitting here debating strategy. Elias would be dead and this chamber would be drenched in blood. But instead, Zokthar had let it happen. He had responded in kind, and now he was thinking. Finally, the warlord let out a low, rumbling sound. It was not quite a growl, not quite a purr. Something in between. Human, he said slowly, you are either the most foolish creature in this galaxy, or the most dangerous. Elias grinned. Why not both? The room braced for impact. And then, to the absolute horror of the Galactic Council, Zokthar reached out once more and patted Elias on the head again. The entire council chamber collapsed into hysteria. Representatives shouted. In disbelief, security forces abandoned protocol entirely, and multiple species began reassessing everything they knew about intergalactic politics. Because if a human could walk up to the most terrifying creature in existence, pet it, and live, then what else were humans capable of? Zokthar, for his part, seemed amused by the reaction. His golden eyes flickered with something dangerously close to amusement. He turned to his warriors, who still looked like their entire worldview had just been shattered. Return to the Dominion, he ordered. Spread word of this event. Let the Varrock know, he glanced at Elias, that the humans are not to be underestimated. The warriors hesitated, then nodded sharply. They turned and left, still clearly struggling to comprehend what had just happened. Zokthar stood to leave but paused, looking down at Elias one last time. Perhaps, he mused, there is merit in your way. Elias grinned. Damn, right there is. And hey, next time you're in the Sol system, I'll introduce you to my dog. You'd love him. Zokthar let out a final, low rumble. Then he turned and left. The chamber sat in stunned silence. Elias stretched, then casually dusted himself off. Well, he said cheerfully, that went great. The council speaker fainted.